Hey everybody, this is Maximilian Jono, and we are talking about the Capricorn Full Moon today and how it opens us up into the month of July, which really is on many fronts the most activating and potent month of this entire year, astrologically speaking. So we'll use the moment of the full moon and also how it ties into the coming full moon in a month, end of July, which is a very potent full moon, and see what is kind of constellating in the field right now, because there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of big shifts in the next couple of days alone. And it's a bit interesting because the Capricorn full moon by itself this year is not so potent. There's not so many big connections that it draws that really normally can contribute to moon cycle, a new or full moon really landing and hitting us hard. But because just after and just before the full moon is exact on Monday, Tuesday, we have all of these shifts happening, right? Jupiter is moving into Leo out of Cancer. Mercury goes retrograde in late Cancer. It almost touched Jupiter, but not quite. Something also to consider. Chiron just entered Taurus for the first time a couple of days ago. And then 3rd, 4th of July, we'll have Mars meeting Uranus in early Gemini. Mars just moves into Gemini now with the Capricorn full moon. And on top of all of this, over the coming month, Jupiter in early Leo will slowly build to an opposition with Pluto in early Aquarius. And that is also where the coming full moon on the 29th of July will really land, which is a really strong full moon by itself. So the entire month has a feeling of like immense energy build up. And I don't know if you can feel it, but almost every single person I am talking to, and me and myself, um, really feeling like this growing intensity or almost a sense of restlessness in our nervous system and the people I talk to, um, which I think already is a signal and sign or symptom of this energetic build-up. We can't see or know yet exactly what or where or how things will happen. And as you know me, if you know me, I'm not one too keen on making concrete world predictions of events. You can do that, sure, but I want to look a bit deeper where and how the astrology is really guiding us on a personal level. If there's a big thing happening with the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which there most likely will be a big thing happening, earthquakes, we already just had one in Venezuela, whatever kind of attacks or false flag attacks in whatever kind of country, the US, Israel, somewhere, something, right? All of this political spinning and also the Gemini deception or lies of that, sure, we can see that, and we can see that this is a moment of great intensity properly, but I don't think it helps any of us to necessarily just see that and focus our mind and our attention and our consciousness on that. It's good to be aware. It's good to not keep our hands stuck in the sand and pretend all of these things don't happen and that they're not important and they're not having a big effect on us, on humanity, on our societies at large. But if we only pay attention to that and also the astrological predictions and all the oh my god doom and gloom and this fear mongering, which is also somehow part of it. Yeah, astrology gives you the language and the tools to be able to semi-predict or see into the future, at least energetically, and then draw the connections to things and events and circumstances of the past and how they played out, and draw certain kinds of conclusions or intuitive hunches around that. But again, it takes us out of our own sovereignty and our own empowerment within our own self and our own life. What can I do about it if there's a big earthquake at the other side of the world, or if some worldly power is playing some not so nice tricks on planet Earth? I can speak with other people about that, but there's also not much sense, and this is a much deeper discussion, I find, in trying to force or convince other people to wake up or to see things the same way that you do. If you're watching this, you're engaging with astrological content, which already makes you a small niche and minority in the bigger collective field. And many people would already ridicule you for that, family members, friends, or whatever, not being able to understand that side. And that is, of course, so much also this Uranus and Gemini kind of quality of where and how that splitting between two seeming sides and oppositions, if we play into that, which we also do if we try to convince others to see things in the same way that we see them or understand them, we're just reperpetuating separation in the field and in our own selves. So I think the deeper spiritual lesson, and I'm far from having mastered it, and I know it's tricky and I know it's difficult, is I think neither bypassing or dissociating that side of reality and human societal, political, economical realities in the world right now, to pay attention to that, to see deeper, to hopefully see behind the veil and the curtain and the Wizard of Oz fabrications that are happening on that site. But again, if we give too much attention to that, we lose so much of our power that is meant to be expressed in the here now in our own direct field. Of course, through the technology of the internet, we can broadcast our little perspective and my little blip and my viewpoint to everybody and everything, and the algorithm will pick it up and millions of people will hear it, right? But again, there is also this kind of dissociated energy. How does that change and shape your reality in the here and now, what you're doing? So having said all of that, I didn't expect that this would come out now. Let's actually look into the chart and see where this full moon lands and how that translates also to these other activations that we'll see over the coming weeks. Because again, I really think July is where energy really picks up, where the collective energies that are especially signaled by Saturn and Neptune in early Aries. We see this huge heat wave now. Oh, the hottest days ever. Yeah, that's Saturn in Aries, right? The last 2 years, Saturn in Pisces was so much more about water and storms and ice, or the lack of water, the scarcity of water. Wherever Saturn is, we suffer, right? There's the limitations, there's the scarcity, there's the intensity of that certain kind of elemental force. Now, Saturn in Aries, we've got that heat wave already. We see a lot of manifestations of Saturn in Aries already, of course. But it really feels like this month of July is where so much of these outer planet processes, Pluto and Uranus included, are really getting pulled into the field much more. But yeah, slowing down, just like Mercury, and actually looking at the chart, which is right now set for the full moon, right? You see here the moon in Capricorn, opposite the sun in Cancer on 8 degrees of Cancer and Capricorn. Saying, of course, that this moon is ruled by Saturn. And a few things I briefly want to say to this full moon is there is this square from the full moon, a bit more to Neptune than it is to Saturn itself. Saturn is on 14 degrees of Aries already, so this would be a 6-degree orb. And to Neptune, it's a 4-degree orb. And that is, again, this kind of weird conflicting energy of these two very opposing archetypal functions, which for the last year or so, already in Pisces, have been traveling together. Where with Saturn, we need that structure and stability and commitment and integrity, but also the patience and the discipline, right? And Saturn in Aries teaching us so much about instinct and about will and about desire, about how to really express that fire within us and to be bold, to be brave, to do new things, to be new self, and to consolidate a sense of agency and self-responsibility around that, but also where and how we have to have patience, and we can't do everything now and instantly, and this and a pure expression of just impulsive Aries fire and drive or aggressive energy is also not going to bring us forward so much, right? So there we see that Saturn side. Saturn, of course, being the ruler of a full moon in Capricorn, is very significant. Yet at the same time, the last couple of days, the sun was exactly in a square to Neptune, and this aspect is still quite strong in the field, with the full moon being also very close in a square to Neptune, which confuses, it dilutes, it washes away, it washes old identities, old ambitions, old emotional attachments away, right? It makes us unsure of ourselves, and all of this can be very tricky seas to navigate, but the deeper energy of Neptune is, of course, one of wanting to help us purify in order to come to a deeper appreciation of life and reality as a web of interbeing, as a story of wholeness and unity and togetherness. To see that there is ultimately no separation in reality from anything or anybody. And the collective processes are the personal processes. The personal processes, the personal healing will bring the collective healing, and vice versa. So a full moon in Capricorn, which normally is so much about like what long-term goals and visions am I setting, what mountaintops am I aiming for and committing to, maybe a slower or longer path, but one that I know like I gotta persevere on this. And that's the Capricorn side as well. We can't rush to the mountaintop. You'll be exhausted halfway up, and you maybe didn't prepare because you just thought I'm just gonna go and run out of the house. Take that metaphor to whatever kind of avenue or mountaintops you want to reach. If you don't prepare properly, if you don't bring the supplies and the proper clothes and whatever, you won't have such a good time on the mountain, right? Trying to reach that top. So whether that's personal, professional, in our relationships, long-term goals, long-term visions is what a Capricorn full moon is about. And the necessary preparation and diligence and patience that has to slow us down a bit in order to consolidate us. At the same time, being square to Neptune, we see also this sense of what are my visions and goals and ambitions anyhow? What do they matter in the face of collective upheaval, of climate crisis, of whatever kind of intensity happening on the world stage and the aliens coming and whatever? Right. So feeling a sense of loss or disempowerment or confusion in regards to how can I even bring myself to commit to a certain path or a certain goal or ambition when maybe there's these bigger processes or there's also these internal processes of old meaning-making structures, which I talked so much about in last year with Neptune shift from Pisces to Aries, dissolving, falling away, and this still very prevalent sense of collective disillusionment and collective overwhelm and collective confusion, which with Pisces was a bit more passive, and now with Aries is much more active. This like all of this fighting and moving and shaping and changing and pushing, but you can feel the kind of like desperation or also fear behind it of like, oh, what even does make meaning and thus also identity personally, but also in the bigger collective field, because collectively we're at a point where old meaning-making structures, old mythologies, or collective storylines of patriarchy, of individualism, of capitalism, of whatever, are just they're just not going to cut it anymore, right? But then still finding a way to hold that complexity and at the same time see, but I can still commit to certain roots, certain mountaintops, certain Capricorn visions and goals, right? It's of course also interesting always to see that Capricorn full moon mirrors the Cancer sun. The moon naturally rules Cancer, and this is also about the inner emotional life and the inner emotional shell that we maybe need to come out of, but also where and how what has been nourished deeply within on our heart and soul level and maybe feels very vulnerable for exposure or standing out in greater society, which is so much the energy of Capricorn, but still mirroring that and saying like, okay, but we gotta reparent ourselves. We gotta hold the space and hold the commitment, but also maybe be a bit, I don't want to say strict, but learn to discipline ourselves and to see that that also can be a deep act of love and not of shame and guilt and suppression or denial, but that where discipline and commitment can be a deep act of love and reverence for ourselves. So anyhow, that's more or less the only really significant aspects this moon is making, which then brings us on to the next territories, which are, I just named them already, but first of all, you see here, there's Mercury with a little s, it means it's stationing, it's about to go retrograde, and Jupiter also on the very last degree and arc minutes of the sign of Cancer. You also see Mars just having entered Gemini, 0 degrees of Gemini, preparing to meet Uranus, and also Chiron just entered Taurus for the very first time, like I think a week ago or so, 10 days ago or so. It's only there for the first 3 months now until middle of September, but it will only fully go into Taurus by next, I think, April. So we still have one last hooray around the wounding and healing side of Aries, which is so strongly in the field anyhow with Saturn there. But Chiron and Taurus already showing up. Where are there deep wounds of worthiness and deserving and embodiment and safety? When Chiron and Aries was much more on the yang side, Aries, Mars, expression of will and desire. Chiron and Taurus now is so much more about where and how is the feminine, quote unquote, the yin energy, which is translated as feminine quite often culturally, the yin Venus inner receiving magnetic deserving side of ourselves deeply wounded. Where and how do we still carry patterns of wounding and pain and suffering? But again, the wound is where the light gets in, the crack is where the light gets in. So there's the first brief activation. I don't want to talk too much about Chiron today. I want to talk about these other 3 planets. We move a day forward. This is now July 1st. You see, this is just after midnight, 1 o'clock. And Jupiter entered Leo, leaving the territory of Cancer, and Mercury got the little RX next to it and starts going retrograde. Then 3-4 days later, by July 3rd, 4th, Mars is creating a conjunction with Uranus on 3 degrees of Gemini. Again, what I said about Gemini, there's both the polarity and the splitting, but also, and that's the revolutionary side of Uranus and Gemini, where and how we really must meet the mirror and the other and opposing views and learn to, I don't want to use the word transcend because that very often has a connotation of kind of spiritual and psychological bypassing, but more a side of where and how can we see and hold the complexity of paradox and both viewpoints, both sides of whatever kind of topic or spectrum can both be right, because we allow the individuality and the uniqueness, that's Uranus, the uniqueness of every single viewpoint to be present. How you feel about topic XYZ, how the next person feels, and your neighbor and your sister and your mom and your partner and whatever and your boss. Everything there, every viewpoint is, first of all, valid in and of itself, because that person experiences or sees or maybe also projects reality in a certain kind of way. Where and how the revolutionary side of Uranus and Gemini, I think, really comes in over the next years with the rise of AI and our collective dissociation and mental information nervous system overwhelm from the information technology and all the disparate viewpoints and blips and whatever being broadcasted into the worldwide infinity of the web. The really revolutionary thing will just be sitting opposite another person and truly learning to listen and seeing like, your viewpoint is correct and is valid, is allowed, and so is mine. And they might be very different, but it doesn't mean that there needs to create a separation, but where and how we can really learn to listen, and through that listening and learning to see how it feels to walk in another's shoes, discovering more of our own uniqueness, but also more of the liberating uniqueness of humanity at large. On the greater mundane collective side, of course, there is this big thing with Uranus in Gemini and the USA and the US Sibley chart. And this reoccurrence of Uranus every 84 years it takes to move around the sun, and Uranus in Gemini just coinciding with the US always being involved in very big conflicts, internal or external. The last one was, of course, Second World War. And Mars tends to bring out the first strong kind of activation of whatever transpersonal slower forces moving in the field. Mars or the moon are very often, and Mercury as well, the ones that really pull the energy down and really activate it and bring it strongly into the field. So this is why like Mars-Uranus conjunctions happen every 2 years, but this is the first one that happens in the sign of Gemini. There is this history and this like cyclical reoccurrence with the USA, there is a lot of very interesting correspondences to the archetype of Gemini, right? The splitting of the atom, so nuclear power, but also nuclear bombs, right? That's like, again the splitting apart kind of Gemini quality, which is there. The uh, class or race things, which we see now, Israel is a worse apartheid state and actively engaged in the unaliving of one big part of the native people of that land, right? So we see the strong shadow of that Gemini side. We see the strong shadow, of course, in the USA since a long time, the left and right, Democrat, Republican, but like this kind of side where it just constellates very easily in these two seemingly polar opposite forces. But this other thing to keep in mind also in our own personal lives is whatever you resist persists. And Gemini is by its own very nature such a mutable archetype. It's about mutable, adaptable air. Gemini is about curiosity and openness and adaptability and not getting fixed on one viewpoint, not getting identified with one side, which is also why Gemini people or people with strong Gemini influence in their chart are sometimes said to be like, oh, they're two-faced or whatever. But it's not that, at least most Geminis, of course, there's a lot of lying, corrupt politicians that play this archetype out in this way. But most people with Gemini don't do this with any kind of malice or even consciously. There's just this huge adaptability to I'm showing a different side. I can activate and live out a different side of myself, or also my mind and my viewpoints, my curiosities with person A, and with person B, I live a different side. And with this friendship group, I can express a different side. And there is just this adaptability and not getting fixed on any one side. And I think this is that lesson of whatever you resist persists. And as long as we hold on and attach and identify strongly with one side of the coin, one side of the spectrum, we will have to magnetize an opposing mirror that will be equally strong in their viewpoints and their perspectives as us, because that mirror principle of magnetism, it just has to be created in order for us to be able to see the underlying unity behind things. Just like in our astrology charts, right? All the signs always have their opposites. Gemini is opposite Sagittarius, the sister signs. There is no higher or lower. It's two sides of the mandala spectrum, but both actually having the same kind of drive, the same kind of core that they want to reach. There's different sides of the spectrum. So Mars, Uranus in Gemini. Yeah, 3rd or 4th of July might be like, oof, might be a big day, but also try to be adaptable in your engagements with other people. And that, of course, really much brings us to Mercury being retrograde in Cancer. I made a much longer video about this 2-3 weeks ago already because we've got this very long Mercury time in Cancer, 10 weeks in total. Crazy long time for Mercury being in any sign. And Mercury is, of course, the ruler of the sign of Gemini. And Mercury going retrograde now in Cancer shows us where and how our emotional attachment to our stories, to our viewpoints, or the confluence of the unconscious, emotional, and also inner child stories of our pain, our woundedness, the impacts that we received. Just like the moon ruling Cancer, right? And the moon has all of these craters. The impact in our conditioning, in our society, in our family system, in our ancestral line that we received, that is, for the most part, very unconscious. And we think about something, but actually it's just an emotional bias, the emotional attachment to a certain story, to a certain perspective. Mercury going retrograde in Cancer is so much about rewiring, reconsidering, retelling ourselves where and how we tell ourselves or feel also the emotional patterns, the emotional stories of our identity, of our life, of our upbringing. And yeah, that might bring up a lot of memories from the past, memories from our childhood, memories from our family system, emotions from our family system, where we always thought like, oh, that is the story, this is how it actually happened. But Mercury retrograde in Mercury retrograde in Cancer now, sorry, showing us, is that really what happened, or is just that the story you tell yourself, which maybe gives you a certain type of attachment or identity even? the Cancer shell to protect us against similar hurts from future occurrences that might be similar, but can also imprison us, keep us very much locked in. But yeah, Mercury retrograde in Cancer thus also really brings up these huge emotional sensitivities. Where and how do we feel really, really easily snappy and moody and protective, right? Cancer energy is much more about passive aggressive expression of needs, and it's very often the unmet needs that can express themselves the loudest, but usually passive aggressively, right? Cancer is so much about our needs, and with Gemini we want to be heard. We want to be heard. Can you hear what I'm saying? Do you want to understand that? That is what Gemini needs. If Gemini doesn't get that, there can be deep trauma, there can be deep pain and suffering in the family system, in the upbringing, in relationships. Gemini needs to be heard. What they communicate, Cancer needs to be felt, needs to be understood emotionally. So Mars, Uranus, while Mercury goes retrograde in Cancer, just speaks of a very like emotional, volatile energy. And again, the invitation I think is stay flexible, rewrite, retell yourself the story, remember in a different way, to remember, bring these parts of the story back to yourself, but also remember as in remember it in a different way. Because where and how, like I said earlier, where and how we project our stories because we think that is what happened, and thus create a certain kind of emotional narrative, which, yes, maybe defended us in the past or gave us a feeling of justification or whatever. I'm right and you're wrong. But this energy shows like, does that really still serve us? So that is a big thing here in the field. And it ties into Mercury almost having met Jupiter, but not quite, right? If we move a bit backwards here through the days, you see Mercury here. This is nowish, this weekend. Mercury is still moving forward very, very slowly. It's slowing down. But that way, it's not meeting Jupiter fully. And Jupiter is, of course, how we make meaning, how we find a greater vision and find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in life, how we feel connected to something greater. Mercury and Jupiter are very much like two sides of the same coin, the left brain and the right brain, the logical and the intuitive. So Mercury almost meeting Jupiter, but then separating shows us a message that didn't fully land, something that still emotionally needs to be digested, connections that almost happened but then didn't, and Mercury retrograde, whatever, flights that almost were caught but then you didn't catch them, expansive states where you thought like this is happening now in a couple of days, but then actually like things are falling apart or things are moving in a different way. Typical Mercury retrograde energy that is that trickster psychopomp moving us from one dimension to another, but the in-between space is just nebulous, even more so in Cancer, even more so with a full moon that squares Neptune. Bringing us to the last point for today's menu, which is Jupiter in Leo now, right? Jupiter entered Cancer last June. Jupiter always spends 1 year in each given sign. And Jupiter now in Leo for the next year until I think late July 2027. Speaks so much about, right, with Jupiter we want to find expansion, and Jupiter rules luck and joy, optimism, faith, belief, but also where there can be too much of a good thing, inflation, overinflation, exaggeration, right? Uh, Certain things, many things are very beautiful and healthy, but if you got too much of them, nobody can handle too many relationships, too many friendships. Uh, Eat a healthy salad or a healthy smoothie, that's great. Try to drink 20 of them in a day and you'll feel awful, right? So with Jupiter, there can often be like this desire more, 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 and all of the good and beautiful things of the world. But it can also be very overwhelming once all of the good things happen in our life and we're like, oof, this is like, the lesson is moderation, of course, with Jupiter. And the other lesson is making leaps of faith. right? Trusting our intuition, trusting synchronicities. There is that Jupiter Zeus Godfather finger pointing the way, but leaps of faith very often ask us to let go of the logical mind, that Mercury, which is anyhow in a big washing machine kind of purifying process right now, that really cleanses emotionally our emotional mind body over the next coming weeks, all of July, while Jupiter in Leo moves ahead and says, jump anyhow, trust the guidance, trust the synchronicity, and especially in Leo, trust your heart, trust yourself. Leo is so much about self and identity and the heart and courageously living from our heart, which does make us vulnerable. It does expose us, right? With Leo, we are getting seen, but when we're getting seen, like, oh, people will not like you. People will not like your song, right? Nor what you're doing. But if we hide ourselves, the right people, the right connections also can't find us, right? So we have to have a certain sense of exposure with Leo, and with Jupiter in Leo now, the next year shows us the Jupiter blessings and luck and joy and abundance, but also greater sense of meaning and purpose in life, in reality, will come by trusting ourselves, will come by making leaps of faith where our heart says yes, even though our mind might rebel, or the people might say like, oh, don't do that. But like trusting our heart implicitly and seeing like in and through our heart, we have a connection to spirit, to the beyond, whatever name you want to give it, and that can guide us not just through like, oh, outer events, outer miracles happening and consolating, but no, the voice of spirit, the voice of divinity, the voice of Gaia, the Great Mother, it also moves through every single one of us, right? And we can only really hear that whisper of the soul in our heart, and it is a whisper for the most part, for most people, it is just a whisper. It'll never be loud, it'll never be too crazy bold and screaming and shouting at us, right? That's often fear, that's anxiety, that's whatever FOMO, that's our mind playing tricks on us. No, the true voice of the heart is usually quite silent. It doesn't need to impose itself. It knows what is right, it knows what is true, it knows that for us, we, our higher self, whatever name you want to give it, knows that for us. And that's then the lesson for us as human ego personalities to have the courage to follow that, because it will very often lead us into unknown territory. Our mind will panic. We don't necessarily know where we're going, but the heart knows like, oh, I'm on the right track. I can illuminate a path. And you might not see the big goal, you might not see the mountaintop just yet, but you know that this track tracks. This is the way. This is the way, one step at a time, trusting our heart, expanding that quality within us. Bringing us back to the current moment, and then to also wrap up, over the coming days and weeks, then in July, you see Jupiter slowly building this opposition to Pluto here in early Aquarius. Around the new moon in Cancer, we get one activation here, right? So around mid-July, Mercury still retrograde by that time. But what I think will be probably the biggest activation, even though they have their first exact opposition here, July 20th, 21st, right? The aspect is exact for the first time there. I think for the only time also because Jupiter won't go retrograde so far to Leo. So this is like just before the Sun enters Leo, just as the Mercury retrograde is ending on July 23rd. And then a few days later, on July 29th, the full moon will really pull it into the field here. On 6 degrees of Leo, the Sun is exactly together with Jupiter, like 5 arc minutes from exact. And that's also super close with Pluto, that full moon, July 29th. Like I said, these slower moving planets, they often need these activations from the faster ones, Mercury, Mars, Moon, to really pull them into the field. July 29th is that moment for Jupiter-Pluto's opposition. And there's also that Pluto in Aquarius energy. The opposition is, of course, a tension aspect. Where and how can I trust my heart? Can I trust myself? Am I good and worthy enough? Still that Chiron and Taurus, woundedness, that actually is an opening that brings healing. But we first have to become aware of where and how deep the pain or the wound is, right? In regards to receiving, in regards to being safe enough or worthy enough to receive ourselves, to meet ourselves, to Leo, to see ourselves. It's not about other people learning to see us, it's about us seeing and learning to love ourselves truly, fully, and acting and expressing from that part. But then, because then all the rejections or the judgment or whatever of other people, it'll be Aquarius. It'll be like, whatever. I don't care. Aquarius is liberated. True highest level of Aquarius energy is liberated, is freed from societal expectations, from the fear of others. But Pluto in Aquarius, of course, shows the big, big, big collective processes are happening on the Aquarius front. AI and robots and aliens is one thing. Power to the people and people on the streets is another thing. But also the shadow side of Aquarius that the world is finally getting awake to, the elites, right? Aquarius' best side is liberty, equality, right, and fraternity, the French Revolution ideals. The collective brother sisterhood of men, of men as humanity, not men as masculine. Um, the lower side of Aquarius is also splitting off, dissociating. I am better, you are lower. I am higher, you are underneath me. And so Aquarius is also intense groupthink, peer pressure, but also elite and elitism, right? And where and how these collective powers of the collective unconscious, that includes AI, that includes the war machine, that includes elites. Of course, they're all like one big gang. But also where and how we personally must learn to liberate ourselves, must learn to become free, free from the fear of judgment and of exclusion of the world, right? Where and how we suppress our own heart and soul, Leo, in order to still belong to a certain kind of group or an village, tribal kind of quality. And we're reaching the peak of individuation and individualism here, which was necessary apparently for humanity. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been on that track for so long. But it's not just negative, but there's so much beauty in that as well, because we're learning to see we are true, unique individuals. And that means everybody's different, everybody's weird, there is no normal, and you don't need to adapt to any kind of normal as long as you are true to your heart and soul, because that is the energy and frequency that really radiates out, that people really meet, that people attract to you, them to you, or to each other, right? That heart and soul energy that must shine through. So, and there, of course, whatever the other side of that brief predictive kind of view is, of course, Leo is also kings and monarchs and rulers on that front, right? So yeah, interesting month, probably especially for the USA. But on us, on a personal soul level, it's like, where and how can I stand? Can we stand so fully in our heart and soul and so freed from societal expectations and pressures that we can truly create a universal humanity and seeing and meeting and appreciating us all for our individuality, for our uniqueness, instead of the Gemini splitting apart left and right, and the intense, always warring factions, or like the one side with the other, or the Gemini higher, the Aquarius higher lower fraction, right? You see, like both of these signs embody that kind of like splitting and separation and polarity, especially on the human social level, quite big, right? Because the air signs are so much ruling humanity at large, and the human psyche, the human social mind. So very, very big and intense month for planet Earth, for humanity. I hope this could give you something and some brief overview and understanding of the territory we're entering into. And as always, if you want to dive deeper and see where and how these transits are really landing, or if you also want to commit to truly deep work together with me, I'm also offering 3-month programs containers, one-on-one meetings every single week, where we really do deep soul guidance using the tool of astrology, but also depth psychology, yoga, meditation, Ayurveda. It's not coaching, it's not mentoring, but it's really a deep space of mystery, of connecting to the mythologies, of connecting to the fixed stars, of connecting to the plants, but especially connecting to your own heart and soul and spirit. So I'm very excited and happy and joyful to be offering this and to be meeting you there. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.